commissioned an artist, Ettore Mazza, to illustrate what an ancient dog funeral might look like. I now use this to introduce new audiences to anthropology. I asked them to look closely and notice that these Upper Paleolithic people are fully clothed, not shirtless. That there are men, there are women, and there are children. That there is a shaman adorning the dog with symbolic ochre, and that the people have adorned themselves with tattoos and jewelry. I explained to them that all of these material details are supported by the archaeological and ethnographic records. I asked them to look for the postulated emotion Mazza painted on their faces, the sadness they felt burying the dog. I asked them to look at the woman consoling the child holding their leg while carrying an infant on their back. I point out the person behind them who cannot bear to look at the scene. Finally, I asked them to take note of the other clan members in the background, respectably observing from afar, as his family lays their loved one to rest. Then I tell them, this is how people used to live. They weren't less than human. They were us. A lot of you are probably familiar with the term anthropology, either as a store or just as a discipline. But if you're not familiar, and maybe you're just more familiar with archaeology in general or history, let me explain what anthropology is. It's my favorite subject, I'm very passionate about it, and honestly, I don't see myself studying anything else. I love it. Anthropology, in its simplest terms, is the study of the human species. And that's the human species in the past, human species in the present, and the human species in the future. And if there was a symbol for the human species, as you can see here in Cueva de los Manos, it's probably the coolest example of them I've ever seen. But obviously that's kind of why I drew them behind me. I find them very interesting and intriguing. So before there were mirrors and you could only really see your reflection in like a still water, you just had these. So if you wanted to leave a message to somebody, all you could do without literacy is just to put your hand on the wall. What stands out to me is that it's people saying that, look, I am human and I was here and like I mattered. You're putting that onto the wall. And I can't get into the psyche of people that lived in the past, but we just like to draw stuff on things and like leave like a mark behind, whether intentionally or purposely, but it at least lets us know they existed and they had lives. And I think it's cool. So let's get into anthropology. In America, we can divide anthropology into 4 different subfields, and that is cultural anthropology, which studies human culture, customs, religions, and behavior. And then we have physical or biological anthropology, which studies... Oh. Hello? Yeah, I'm doing a video. Well, yeah, but what? I thought it was physical or biological. I've been saying physical for almost 10 years now. Okay, well, yeah, I could see how that has negative connotations. So it's just biological now. All right, bye. Biological anthropology, which studies anything from skeletal anatomy to primatology to human evolution to paleoanthropology, digging up ancient hominins and things like that. There's linguistic anthropology, which is not the same thing as linguistics, but very similar, and this is the interpretation of human language and human symbols. So it's not just the language we speak and disseminating where different languages come from, but it's how languages arise, how environment shapes language, and things such as that. And critically looking at the discourse between 2 people or a group of people and seeing how that plays into their culture and their customs. It's very neat. And lastly, we have archaeological anthropology. And I'm biased, it's my favorite, but archaeological anthropology, it's not grave robbing, it's not studying pharaohs and their tombs, and in part it is, but it's the study of human behavior through time. That's the best way I can describe it. All right, moving on. When it boils down to it, what you're asking is, what does it mean to be human? And anthropology is the best science we can use to help us ask that question. We're never gonna know. And it's a little selfish of us to ask that because we're the only people that can kind of, I mean, elephants and maybe whales and stuff can ask like, what does it mean to be a whale? But a squirrel doesn't say, what does it mean to be a squirrel? And who are we to say like, what does it mean to be human? Well, that's not fair. Think about the squirrel. Why does he get to think about himself? Just he's evolved to scavenge nuts and stuff. We're just evolved to be really social and intelligent. We're not that special, but we are really cool, and it's really cool to study us. So let's talk about the history of anthropology now. It wouldn't be Anthropology Day without thanking Papa Franz.
He's the father of American anthropology, and he's the guy that changed the game. Boas had a degree in physics over in Germany and then eventually emigrated over into New York. There, he became a professor of anthropology at Columbia University and was very much associated with the Museum of Natural History in New York, right outside Central Park. I interned there once, and they give you a pass to go to any museum for free in New York, so I spent the whole summer doing that. It was awesome. He had a physics-based mind, research-based mind, and looked at the world scientifically. And then he was really interested in humans and human culture and archaeology, and was really interested in indigenous Americans and wanted to study them. And the turning point in anthropology that he created was, before this, people kind of were just treasure hunting in a way, and you have this thing called culture history. And culture history is what Britain did, and what Nazi Germany did, and what every colonial power did, is try to go get artifacts in other places in the world, or an extreme artifact collection in their own countries, trying to prove that their culture is like the most superior or the oldest, or, you know, like, it's kind of bad when you do research that way because you're going into it biased. Thankfully, we moved away from that because, make no mistake, it made a lot of problems in Europe. Point is, Boas was like, why are we just collecting these masks from the Pacific Northwest and like just taking them as artifacts and putting them in a museum? What about the people that made the masks? What do the masks mean? What is like the culture behind them? How did they get made? Other people probably had those ideas, but he was the first one to be like, let's go. And he made this happen, and he studied people's cultures. And the term you're probably most familiar with that associates with Boas is cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is the idea that no one culture is superior to another. I can't sit here and say that my culture is superior to a culture of people that live in the Amazon uncontacted. It's not. They still have culture. It's infinitely complex. Why? Because I don't know, I can't walk into their culture and know their language and know how to hunt and know what every tree like looks like or how it tastes or whatever. I don't know that. And there's so much we don't know. Yeah, we have like cities and like quite literally empires like at Civ 6, but Civ 5 was better. Every culture has its own intricacies and every culture has its own complexities. And we can't say that one is more complex than another. Ours is built upon other cultures that is compounded upon and shared with other cultures. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have what we have, right? We're no different. If you plopped me in the Amazon with them, I'd probably die. I'd probably fare for like a day or two, but I'm not worried about surviving and getting food and not getting bitten by anything. I'm mostly worried about like the mental breakdown I would have. Anyway, in your daily life, if people have different religious views or different political views than you, it's putting yourself in their shoes to understand why. Why do these people have these beliefs? Are mine better because it's based in this reason or that reason? Who's to say? It's all relative. And going off that, Boas also was a proponent of historical particularism. And historical particularism is contrary and opposite to cultural evolution, which was the dominant theory at the time. And it's a lot of words, but to put it simpler, people before him thought that cultures evolved and they got to a stage where one is the top. It's like the best superior culture, and that other cultures were always advancing towards that. Whereas the historical particularism is more about like every culture is more complex and goes in its own direction. It doesn't necessarily have to become like the Roman Empire. It doesn't, and then fall and then go to something else. It doesn't have to. And you might say, yeah, of course it will. Well, no, it doesn't, because those people have lived in the Amazon for upwards of 10,000 years and have survived this entire time. And their culture has changed, but endured, so it doesn't matter. And that brings us to cultural anthropology, which is my second favorite field? I don't know, it doesn't matter. They're all interesting. I said this earlier, but cultural anthropology is the study of human cultures, belief systems, their behaviors, and all that. But obviously animals can have some kinds of culture too, but in the sense of anthropology, culture is shared and learned human behavior. And as a science, cultural anthropology is able to systematically and scientifically study human cultures. I sound like a broken record, but you might be familiar with Margaret Mead, or you might be familiar with Jane Goodall, who went in and studied chimpanzee culture, and Margaret Mead, who studied Samoan culture. Who am I gonna tell? The ethics board of time-traveling anthropologists?
Hello? Yes, I know Jane Goodall is not a cultural anthropologist. What she did was discover that chimpanzees actually are very complex creatures that have their own kind of culture. I know I lumped them in together with Margaret Mead and other cultural anthropologists, but they get the point. I don't have a teleprompter. I'm not a professor. I'm on YouTube. All right. Sorry. I love you too. Bye.
But it doesn't have to be some exotic place. What we can do with cultural anthropology is study goth culture in high schools. If you want to study inmate culture at the maximum security prison in Colorado, you can do that. If you want to study YouTubers as a culture, you can find a way to study that. Got it. Like and share this video. What's like? And with cultural anthropology, you can translate that into a corporate job, right? You can be a market analyst. You can especially do this with social media or for marketing, but you can study a target audience and help people sell to them. And this next balding European dude has a controversial history as well, but well, that's another video. Let's just talk about the major impact that he had on anthropology. Bronislaw Malinowski, which apparently in Polish means little raspberry man. He went, you guessed it, to the South Pacific to study the Trorobrand Islanders. And what he discovered living among these people is something pretty profound in a way, is that these people have an elaborate gift exchange system, which involves a lot of ceremony and pomp and circumstance and the customs and the traditions that go around it. And what he learned was that, okay, every culture does this and we're all kind of similar in that way. We have elaborate things around interpersonal gift exchanges. Not to say that's the one thing that unites all humans, but what he realized was like, okay, we do this too back in Europe. Like we throw elaborate parties for our 2-year-old when they have a birthday party. The 2-year-old doesn't care about all the adults that come to the party, but the party's really meant for the adults to socialize and fraternize and to, play with social status and whatnot. And yeah, people give gifts to the child, but there's the social function behind it. You ever go back and watch your old childhood videos of your birthday party? When you look at it, you're like, oh, I remember getting that N64, that was awesome, but I think I got that for Christmas, doesn't matter. But when you go back as an adult and you watch those videos, what sticks out to you? It's the people that were there. Like, oh, I didn't know Aunt whoever was there or Grandma was there. That means more to you. It's the culture behind it. It's not what you're getting. And he called this civilizing the savage and savaging the civil, or something like that. Savaging the civilized, civilizing the savage. Not a good thing to say, either way, in today's day and age, but you get the gist. He's saying that we're all equal, in a way. But then we found his diary, and people read it, and had he been starring on The Mandalorian, he would not be hired for the next season. Less intense subject. Linguistics. Actually, this is my least favorite class in grad school. It was very hard, but also fascinating at the same time. So kind of like math. Linguistic anthropology is the study of human language and communication. And that can also be signs and signals. It doesn't have to just be language. I'm from New York, and a cultural stereotype of New Yorkers is that we talk with our hands a lot. You probably saw me doing that a bunch. It helps visualize what I'm saying and convey it to you in a visual format in addition to my verbal speech, right? That's linguistic anthropology. Signs, you know what this sign means. You just know that octagon means stop. Same thing with the green light. No one's there telling you go. It just means go. It's a symbol. Also, some people cross their arms when they're talking. Some people believe in psychology that means you're a little more closed off, but again, it's an outdated theory, but you can use linguistic anthropology to test that. Is it really a thing? Is it not a thing? And I think the leading science says, no, it's not really a thing. Another sense of linguistic anthropology is critical discourse analysis. This is analyzing the language between two people or a group of people and seeing what the underlying messages are. A good example of this is advertising. If you look at the App Store and see what all the food apps are, they're mostly red. Why is that? Red is a comforting color. It's also a food that makes us hungry. I'm sure there's people that object to that, but look at it. A lot of stuff is red, but you can do that with language. Watch a presidential debate.
Now there are some 10,000 centrifuges spinning uranium, preparing to create a nuclear threat.
You're conveying a message of like, yeah, I'm really pissed at you, but like, I'm just gonna smile because I gotta show this appearance, right?
Nothing Governor Romney just said is true. And every fact checker and every reporter who's looked at it, Governor has said this is not true. And
that's critical discourse. And lastly, there's a Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, and Sapir was a student of Franz Boas. Franz Boas actually taught a lot of students, Margaret Mead and a few others that are well known that went off and taught their own anthropology schools. But back to that, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is the idea that language shapes your culture. A good example of this comes from the movie Arrival, where they explain the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis.
You know, I was doing some reading about this idea that if you immerse yourself into a foreign language, that you can actually rewire your brain.
The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. The theory that it's the theory that the language you speak determines how you think and.
Yeah, it affects how you see everything. It was. I'm curious. Are you dreaming in their language?
But one thing to know is no one's like born with a predisposed way to speak a language. I mean, yeah, your mouth probably is genetically more similar to that of your mother's and your father's, but like, does that mean you speak Chinese better than someone else? No, because I could be born in China, raised there my whole life, and I'd speak fluent Mandarin. Does that mean I'm like predetermined to speak English? Absolutely not. Here's another one. Blue is a very uncommon word in most languages in the world. It's blue in English because we have a word for it, I guess, but in most hunter-gatherer societies, there's no word for blue. It's just like there's sky and there's water. There's no blue because it's so uncommon in the world. A cool example of this is in the original Pokemon games, in the concept art, Bulbasaur was supposed to be green. In Japanese, the word for green and blue I think was interchangeable or it doesn't exist in the same way. So when they tried to say that, the guy drew it as blue, not green. Your language shapes your culture. What? Now, physical anthropology, which is also my favorite. They're all my favorite. You. This is a study of human osteology, anatomy, forensic anthropology, human physiology, primatology, you name it. Human evolution, the whole thing. The good stuff. Think about the history of physical anthropology. Go back to the Greeks or anybody who was doing studies on people. That gets pretty dark real quick if you go down that rabbit hole. Just think about Da Vinci. He was that famous drawing, right? That's physical anthropology in a nutshell. And you can see the classic image of human evolution, how humans got to where we are. And from human evolution, we can look at paleoanthropology, which is digging up Lucy or digging up Artie or digging up all the various hominins that once lived. Very heated and contentious field. If you want to watch some like cool drama show, they should get a reality TV at a physical anthropology conference because it's wild. And then that also gets into primatology, which Jane Goodall and the like, who was a student of a paleoanthropologist. But what that is you're studying our closest remaining relatives, which are the great apes, and by extent further back is our monkeys. Monkeys and apes are a different thing. I know Joe Rogan goes on this tirade all the time. No. Apes make nests. They don't have tails. Monkeys have tails. They live differently and live in huge, big like things most of the time, or they vary. Doesn't have a tail, it's probably an ape. What can we learn with physical anthropology? That's probably the question you're asking. Or not. You probably clicked off of this by now. Don't do that. What's the difference between this grave and that grave? Clear difference, right? Well, first off, this one's a Neanderthal, and that one is a modern human, also known as a pharaoh, buried in an elaborate tomb that took years to build and took human lives to build. Why are they different? And this gets into archaeology a bit too, but we're not studying like the gold and like just, oh, look at these antiquities. Like, no, it's not that, or at least in America. What we look at is the behavior. What culture and what behavior led to that pharaoh having such an elaborate burial? Like an afterlife situation. How did he get so much control over people to put so much effort and blood, sweat, tear, and life into his afterlife after he already died? Like, come on, what the hell? And then this little grave here, why is there a difference? What leads to this? But anyway, food for thought, but let's look at the grave. This is a Neanderthal, buried in a lined grave. Does this mean Neanderthals had religion? Does this mean they had complex belief enough to have an afterlife? I don't know, but they buried their dead. Maybe it kept them from eating grandma. Neanderthal grandma. A lot of people think they did have ceremonial burials. A lot of people think they don't. We can learn a lot from people's bones. They're a map of your life, in essence. If you have peri-wounds on your arms when you die, like some Neanderthals do, we can tell that there's probably interpersonal violence between them. Or at least like hunting accidents. We can't tell, but who's to say? You can tell like, oh, he died in a panic, or this person's bones were broken. This person died of old age. This person was cremated. This person was missing a leg. This poor hominin died of a toothache. Brutal. I don't wish dental pain on anyone. But one of the coolest things in physical anthropology I've ever seen was a lecture by Dr. Tiffany Tung. She's at Vanderbilt University. And dude, this is awesome. Let me set the scene. found this site in the Andes with a lot of human sacrifice went on. Like stone tool cuts the finger off, stone tools cut the heads off, like brutal stuff. The problem, they wanted to know, were these people, or were these captives from the local area? Like were they part of that civilization, or did they come from other areas? So what they did was an isotope analysis. So what that is, it's a roadmap of your bones of what you were eating. It largely remains in your bones. They got guinea pigs, literal guinea pigs, to eat grass all over different areas of the Andes, and then tested their isotopes with the human isotopes and learned that these people were taken captive, I think like dozens, if not hundreds of miles away from where they were being sacrificed, which is just one, so violent, and then two, like, wow, that's amazing, but like not at the same time. Anyway, amazing lecture. And lastly, let's talk about Ötzi. Ötzi, the Iceman, when we found him, eroded from the ice in the Alps. Along with his clothes and his material culture, which is all archaeological, I'll get into that, he had 2 arrows in his back, so we knew that he was murdered. This dude was definitely whacked. I don't think it was an accident and someone left him. If it was an accident, they would have brought something back to say like, oh no, he died, and brought his axe or something like that. He got whacked. Secondly, he had tattoos. That tattoo's a physical anthropology thing. My friend Aaron does a lot of cool work with that at Archaeology Inc. Check it out. The archaeology of tattooing is also fascinating, but the point is, he had these tattoos around places where his joints would have been aching him, right? And why were his joints aching him? Well, when they did an analysis on his blood and like his, body, the dude had lactose intolerance, gluten intolerance, Lyme disease, and also low-grade arsenic poisoning. So maybe he wanted to die. Anyway, a lot of stuff physical anthropology can tell us. And lastly, let's talk about archaeology. I've mentioned it a bunch because obviously it sneaks in everywhere. Archaeology is life. But as I said earlier, archaeology is the study of human behavior through time. And you can use this by studying human material culture, also known as artifacts. And what you're looking at is how people lived in the past, and you interpret that through their material culture they left behind. So their artifacts, their food, their bones, their homes, things that you can pick up and interpret. Or through the geology of the site, like geoarchaeology, or through the animals at the site, through zooarchaeology, and anything like that. You're just trying to piece together what clues you have that's left behind physically by humans to infer their behavior and learn more about them. Another way to look at it is archaeology is about asking questions. You don't just put a shovel in the ground to see what's there and then write a report about it. No. Contract archaeology is, because it has to be dug out and you have to know what's there. But in the general sense of like the discipline of archaeology and academic research, archaeology is about asking questions. Yeah, there's a mammoth at this site. We see the bones and it was killed, but like the question is, to what extent is the campsite that was there? What period of time was this, and how many people were there? That's the question. And how does that fit into the larger aspect of Paleo-Indian archaeology? My thesis question was trying to ask, is there a point at which large projectile points are too big to be fired from a bow? So what I wanted to know is like, could Paleo-Indians have been using a bow with their big points? It turns out, yeah, it's totally possible. I don't really think they did, but I used science to prove it's possible. Science. But I'm going on a tangent again, but I'm gonna hammer this in with what's important and pull this into why anthropology is important. Let's watch one of my favorite YouTube channels, Prologue Technology. Look at him building this structure. He needs to make the stone tool to build the structure. So he whacks some stone, fillet naps it, makes a sharp edge, uses that to cut wood. Cuts that wood, then he makes post holes with that wood. And then using the post hole, he then sticks in the larger wood to make the beams for the structure, and then he puts the structure together using cordage that he made from around his environment. When he's done, he makes a fire and he cooks some food in it. Now imagine all that's gone. Imagine all you can see now is a couple stone flakes, you can see his axe head, you can see his hearth, and you can see what food he had in the hearth, and you can see a couple post holes and how big his structure was. Then let me ask you, what language did he speak? What music did he play? Did he have music? What was his gender? What kind of clothes did he wear? What was his religion? These are questions we really can't answer without a time machine. Like, here's the plain and simple of it, all of that is gone. The clothing they wore, the songs they sang, and the beliefs they had, and their general aspect of daily life is gone. it's lost to the record. It's lost to time. It's gone. But what we can do is analyze what material remains he left. That fire pit, that food, his post holes. That's all we can really get from there. But when we pick that piece of the puzzle and put it in with another piece of the puzzle, 10 miles from that site, find another site and another site, we can get an idea of, okay, people in this area did this, and they made their tools this way. Until we find a burial to see their bones and analyze what they look like, we're not gonna know anything more about them. But it's neat. This person lived, his life mattered, and he was human. Just like you. Now to end this, I'm gonna bring you back to the picture. Everything that I just taught you, look at it now. You can see that they're sad, and they're burying their friend, or a well-regarded dog or wolf in their pack. So long before we started burying dogs, we started burying each other. And that shows that we had some kind of thought of maybe there's an afterlife, or at least grandma's gonna start to stink and you don't want hyenas to eat her, so you gotta bury her. But then it later became probably a ceremonial practice, and it was a whole ritual and going to the next world or the underworld or something like that. We do that for thousands of years, and eventually, for the first time, we do this with dogs. And it's the first time humans transferred this idea of like, we are human to another being and put that being in the ground with dignity. I think that's amazing. That makes me sad that we'll never know what these people's names were, or the really awesome language they probably spoke, or what cool stories they had, or the jokes they had. It's sad to me, but it's also awesome because we can always ask questions about it. But we can tell with anthropology that they lived. And they wanted us to know that by putting these on the wall. They were human.
Oh my Hello? Yes, I know there are a lot of critiques to all the theoretical paradigms that I talked about today, but that's the beauty of anthropology. You can learn these things, and you can read all about theory, and you can go to graduate school and learn all the different ways to think. That's the best part. It's all about critical thinking. I know, right? It's so cool. Yeah, so go ahead and go do... Oh, there's a squirrel outside. I like squirrels. Yeah, so guys, do your own research. I'm not a professor. I just have a master's degree. So what does that mean nowadays? I basically can work at McDonald's. Yeah, all right. And oh, yeah, okay, I forgot. Thank you. Okay. Okay. All right. I forgot to thank my patrons. Really appreciate it. I'm gonna put you guys up right here. Yeah, actually, if you guys can just go ahead and like and subscribe. I hate saying that, but that's the thing I gotta do. Dog's coming inside. Just, you know, subscribe to the Patreon. More videos coming soon. If you want to vote on topics, you can do that there. And really appreciate having you. So, thanks for being human.